What happens when a comedian known for his unfiltered spiritual commentary sits across from one of daytime television's most outspoken hosts? The answer involves raised voices, uncomfortable silences, and a confrontation that had producers scrambling. This is the story of how Russell Brand's appearance on The View went from a standard celebrity interview to one of the most heated exchanges in the show's history, culminating in something nobody saw coming. Before we get into what went down, make sure you hit that subscribe button for Chronicle Chat and drop a comment below telling me what you think about all this. Now let's get into it. The studio audience settled into their seats as the show's theme music faded. Russell Brand walked onto the stage with that familiar energy, his long hair tied back, wearing a mix of bohemian and rock star that somehow worked. The hosts welcomed him with the usual pleasantries, and for the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. He talked about his latest projects, cracked a few jokes that landed well with the audience, and the conversation flowed easily. But anyone who knows Brand's interview history could sense something brewing beneath the surface. He has never been one to stick to the script, and Behar has never been one to let a guest dominate the conversation without pushing back. The shift happened when Whoopi Goldberg opened up the floor to discuss Brand's recent commentary on mainstream media. It was meant to be a softball question, something he could riff on for a minute before they moved to the next topic. But Brand leaned forward in his chair, and you could see the gears turning. "I think what we're seeing," Brand began, his accent thick and his words coming rapid fire, "is a fundamental distrust in institutions that have historically told us what to think, what to believe, what to buy. And I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I am saying we should be asking more questions." Behar jumped in almost immediately. "Russell, asking questions is one thing. Spreading conspiracy theories is another. Where do you draw the line?" The audience went quiet. "That's interesting that you would frame curiosity as conspiracy. When did healthy skepticism become something we need to apologize for?" Brand replied, "I'm not talking about skepticism," Joy shot back, her voice gaining an edge. "I'm talking about the dangerous rhetoric that gets people hurt. You have a platform, and with that comes responsibility." "Responsibility to who?" Brand asked, his tone still calm but pointed. "To the narrative you've decided is correct? Because from where I'm sitting, the media has gotten plenty of things wrong over the years. And yet, we're supposed to just trust that this time, they've got it right." Sunny Hust tried to interject, attempting to steer the conversation back to neutral ground. But Joy wasn't finished. "We're not talking about blind trust, Russell. We're talking about facts, science, expert consensus, things that actually matter when people's lives are on the line." Brand leaned back, spreading his hands in a gesture that could have been conciliatory or condescending, depending on how you read it. "And who decides what the facts are? Who gets to be the arbiter of truth? I've seen experts contradict each other. I've seen science evolve and change. And I've certainly seen the media get things spectacularly wrong. So, forgive me if I think there's value in questioning the official story." The tension in the studio was palpable. Now, Sarah N. looked uncomfortable. Alyssa Farah Griffin was watching intently, and you could see producers off camera starting to move around. Joy's jaw was set, and when she spoke again, her words came out clipped and sharp. "You know what I think, Russell? I think you've built a career out of being contrarian. You take complex issues and you simplify them down to this us versus them mentality, and you do it because it gets you views and attention." Brand's expression shifted. The playful energy drained away, replaced by something more serious. "That's quite an accusation, Joy. And it's interesting that you would accuse me of seeking attention while we're sitting here on a talk show that literally exists to generate attention and sell advertising." "Don't do that," Joy said, her voice rising. "Don't compare what we do here to what you do online. We have standards. We have fact-checkers. We have accountability." "Because I seem to remember this show getting things wrong," Brand asked quietly. "I remember episodes where the narrative pushed here was later proven to be incomplete or outright false. But somehow that's different." Joy stood up. Not fully, just enough to shift her position, but it was a power move that everyone in the studio recognized. "You want to talk about getting things wrong? Let's talk about the damage that's done when someone with millions of followers tells them not to trust doctors, not to trust scientists, not to trust anyone except you and your YouTube channel," she said. "I have never told anyone not to think for themselves," Brand replied. His voice still measured, but you could hear the frustration creeping in. "In fact, I've done the opposite. I've encouraged people to question, to research, to not just accept what they're told." If that's dangerous to you, maybe ask yourself why. Whoopi tried again to redirect, but the momentum had shifted too far. Alyssa jumped in with a question about Brand's spiritual journey, clearly attempting to find safer ground, but Joy wasn't letting it go. Answer the question, Russell. Do you or do you not believe that you have a responsibility to make sure the information you share is accurate? Brand turned to face her fully. Of course I do. But I also believe I have a responsibility to question information that doesn't add up. Even if, especially if, that information is coming from so-called authoritative sources. You're acting like skepticism is the enemy when historically skepticism has been the thing that moved humanity forward. Skepticism based on evidence, Joy countered. Not skepticism based on feelings, mistrust, or some vague sense that everyone's lying to you. And what happens when the evidence changes? Brand asked. What happens when the experts were wrong? Do we just pretend that didn't happen? Do we just move on to the next thing and expect people to keep trusting? The conversation was spiraling now, moving faster and getting more heated with each exchange. The other hosts were trying to find entry points, but Joy and Russell were locked in, neither willing to back down. The audience sat in stunned silence, some looking entertained, others deeply uncomfortable. You're deflecting, Joy said, her finger pointing across the table. You're doing exactly what I said you do. Taking a legitimate question about your responsibility and turning it into some philosophical debate about truth and institutions, Brand replied, his voice finally rising to match hers. This isn't about me, Joy. This is about a fundamental disagreement about whether people should think for themselves or whether they should just accept what they're told by people who claim authority. Nobody is saying people shouldn't think for themselves, Joy said, her face flushed. Now, what we're saying is that thinking for yourself doesn't mean rejecting expertise. It doesn't mean pretending you know better than people who have spent their entire lives studying these issues. And what I'm saying, Brand said, standing up now himself, matching her energy, is that expertise has been wrong before, will be wrong again. And that questioning it isn't dangerous. It's necessary. The studio had gone from uncomfortable to electric. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore. This was a full-blown confrontation, and everyone watching knew they were witnessing something unusual. Joy sat back down, but her posture remained rigid, defensive. She looked at Brand like she was trying to figure out whether to continue engaging or cut her losses. She chose to continue. You keep saying, question everything. Question everything. But what you're really doing is creating doubt where there shouldn't be any. You're making people second-guess things that could save their lives because you've convinced them that everyone with credentials is part of some grand conspiracy. Brand ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that might have looked casual if his jaw wasn't so tight. I have never used the word conspiracy in the way you're using it. What I have said consistently is that institutions have incentives, pharmaceutical companies have profit motives, media companies have advertisers, governments have political agendas. These aren't conspiracies, Joy. These are just facts. And acknowledging those facts doesn't make me dangerous. It makes me honest. Honest. Joy repeated, almost laughing. You want to talk about honest? Let's be honest about what you're doing. You take a kernel of truth, something everyone can agree on. Like, yeah, pharmaceutical companies want to make money. And then you extrapolate that into this whole narrative that we can't trust anything they produce. That's not honesty. Russell, that's manipulation. The accusation landed hard. You could see it in Brand's face, the way his expression tightened. Sunny host tried to interject with something about finding common ground, but Brand was already responding. Manipulation, he said slowly, like he was tasting the word. That's rich coming from someone who sits on a show that's literally designed to shape public opinion. Every topic you choose, every guest you bring on, every question you ask, it's all curated to push a particular worldview, and that's fine. That's your right. But don't sit there and pretend you're not doing exactly what you're accusing me of. We're transparent about our views, Joy fired back. We don't hide behind this false objectivity like you do. We tell people exactly where we stand, and then we let them decide for themselves. No, you don't, Brand said, shaking his head. You tell them where you stand, and then you demonize anyone who disagrees. Look at what's happening right now. I came here to have a conversation, and instead, I'm being accused of spreading conspiracy theories, of manipulating people, of being dangerous. All because I suggested that maybe, just maybe, we should ask more questions before accepting everything we're told. Whoopi's voice cut through, firm but attempting to be diplomatic. I think what Joy is trying to say, Russell, is that there's a difference between asking questions and undermining trust in institutions that are trying to help people. Brand turned to her, and when he spoke, his voice was calmer, but no less intense. Whoopee, with respect, those institutions have to earn trust. They're not owed it by default. And when they make mistakes, when they lie, when they prioritize profit over people, they lose that trust. And my job, as I see it, is to give voice to the people who feel like they've been lied to, who feel like they've been used, who feel like the system doesn't care about them. That's noble, Joy said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Really? It's beautiful. But what about the people who listen to you and then refuse medical treatment because you've convinced them their doctor is just a puppet for big pharma? What about the people who put their kids at risk because you've made them paranoid about everything? I have never told anyone to refuse medical treatment, Brand said, his voice sharp now. Never. What I have said is that people should have informed consent. They should understand what they're putting in their bodies, what the risks are, what the alternatives might be. If that's controversial to you, if that's dangerous, then we have a fundamental disagreement about human autonomy. Informed consent requires accurate information, Joy countered. And you're not giving people accurate information. You're giving them fear. You're giving them doubt. You're giving them reasons to distrust the very people who are trying to keep them alive. Brand leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked directly at Joy. Do you know what I think is dangerous, Joy? I think it's dangerous to tell people to blindly trust authority. I think it's dangerous to shut down questions. I think it's dangerous to create an environment where anyone who expresses doubt or concern is immediately labeled a conspiracy theorist or anti-science, or whatever other term we're using this week to dismiss people. Nobody is shutting down questions, Joy said, exasperated. We're shutting down lies. We're shutting down misinformation. There's a difference. And if you can't see that, then I don't know what to tell you. And who decides what's misinformation? Brand asked again, pressing the point. You see, the government? Because I can point to dozens of examples where what was called misinformation one day became accepted truth the next. The lab leak theory, natural immunity, vaccine efficacy, all of these things were dismissed as conspiracy theories until suddenly they weren't. So forgive me if I'm not willing to just accept your definition of what's true and what's not. Alyssa finally found an opening. Russell, I think what might help here is if you could acknowledge that while questioning is important, there's also value in expertise. That doctors and scientists who have devoted their lives to this work might actually know more than the average person scrolling through YouTube. Brand nodded slowly. Of course, there's value in expertise. I've never said otherwise, but expertise exists within systems, and those systems have flaws. And when the expert consensus has been wrong, catastrophically wrong as it has been throughout history, then we have an obligation to remain skeptical. Not dismissive, not conspiratorial, but skeptical. That's a convenient position, Joy said, because it allows you to never be wrong. If the experts agree with you, great. If they don't, well, they're just part of the system. You've built yourself a worldview where you can't lose. That's not fair, Brand replied. And for the first time, there was something almost vulnerable in his voice. I've been wrong about things. I've changed my mind. I've learned that I've done it by asking questions, not by just accepting what I'm told. And I think that's what scares you, Joy. Not that I'm spreading misinformation, but that I'm encouraging people to think for themselves. Oh, please, Joy said, waving her hand dismissively. Don't flatter yourself. What scares me is that people like you have figured out how to monetize distrust. You figured out that the more you make people paranoid, the more they'll watch your videos, buy your books, support your platform. It's cynical and it's gross. The room went silent. Even the other hosts looked shocked at how personal Joy had just made it. Brand stared at her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but cutting. You know what's cynical, Joy? Accusing someone of bad faith because they disagree with you. You don't know why I do what I do. You don't know what motivates me. You've decided, based on nothing but your own prejudice, that I'm a grift. And that says more about you than it does about me. Joy's eyes flashed. I'm basing it on your actions, Russell, on the things you say and the way you say them. On the fact that you've built an empire out of telling people not to trust anyone but you. I've built a community, Brand corrected, of people who feel unheard. People who feel dismissed by people like you. People who are tired of being told they're stupid for asking questions. And yes, I make money from it just like you make money from this show. But at least I'm honest about what I'm doing. Honest. Joy repeated again, shaking her head. There's that word again. Sarah N., who had been quiet for most of the exchange, finally spoke up. Can I just say something? I think we're all getting a little heated here, and maybe we should take a breath. But neither Joy nor Russell was interested in taking a breath. They were locked in now, and the conversation had moved beyond the original topic into something much more personal. Joy crossed her arms, her body language making it clear she wasn't backing down. You want to talk about honesty? Let's talk about how you present information. You'll take a study, any study, and you'll highlight the parts that support your narrative while conveniently leaving out the context. You'll interview someone with fringe views and present them as if they're on equal footing with the mainstream scientific consensus. That's not honesty, Russell. That's cherry-picking. Brand's laugh was short and humorless. Cherry-picking. That's what you call giving a platform to dissenting voices. Because from where I'm sitting, the mainstream media, your media, only ever presents one side of these debates. You bring on experts who agree with the predetermined narrative, and anyone who disagrees gets dismissed or ignored entirely. At least I'm willing to hear from people you won't give airtime to, because those people are wrong, Joy said, her voice rising again. They're wrong, and giving them a platform doesn't make you brave or open-minded. It makes you irresponsible. When you bring on someone who says vaccines are poison, you're not presenting balance. You're spreading dangerous lies. I've never had anyone on my show who said vaccines are poison. But I have had people on who've talked about vaccine injury, about adverse reactions, about the importance of informed consent. And those are real issues. Joy, whether you want to acknowledge them or not, adverse reactions are rare, Brand said. Incredibly rare, but you give them the same weight as the millions of lives saved. You create this false equivalence that makes people afraid of something that could save their life or their child's life. Joy shot back. Brand stood up again, pacing slightly, his energy needing an outlet. I'm not trying to make anyone afraid. I'm trying to make them informed. There's a difference between fear-mongering and acknowledging that medical interventions come with risks. Every doctor in the world will tell you that. Every consent form you sign before a procedure says that. But somehow, when I say it, I'm dangerous. Context matters, Sunany interjected, trying one more time to add nuance. The way information is presented matters. And I think what Joy is trying to say is that your presentation often lacks the context that would help people understand the actual risk-benefit analysis. Brand turned to her. And I would argue that the mainstream presentation often lacks the context of why people are distrustful in the first place. You can't just tell people to trust the science without acknowledging that the scientific establishment has gotten things wrong, has been influenced by money and politics, has dismissed legitimate concerns. If you want people to trust, you have to give them reasons, too. We do give them reasons, Joy insisted. Data, evidence, peer-reviewed research. But you've convinced your audience that all of that is somehow corrupt or compromised. You've poisoned the well, and now you're acting surprised that people are thirsty. That's a hell of a metaphor, Brand said. And it's completely backwards. The well was already poisoned, Joy, by decades of pharmaceutical companies lying about opioids, by governments conducting unethical experiments on their own citizens, by media outlets pushing stories that turned out to be false. I didn't create that distrust. I'm just acknowledging it exists and exploiting it. Joy added quickly. Brand stopped pacing and faced her directly. You keep coming back to that. You keep insisting that I have some ulterior motive, that I'm manipulating people for personal gain. And I'm telling you that's not what this is. But even if it were, even if I were the cynical grifter you think I am, that doesn't make the questions I'm asking invalid. Attack my character all you want, but at least engage with the substance. The substance, Joy said, leaning forward, is that you're undermining public health. The substance is that people are dying because they've listened to people like you instead of their doctors. The substance is that we're still dealing with preventable diseases because you've made vaccination controversial again. That's the substance. People like me, Brand repeated. That's interesting phrasing. Who exactly are people like me? People who ask questions. People who don't just accept the official narrative. People who think individuals should have autonomy over their own bodies. People who profit from distrust, Joy said flatly. People who figured out that controversy sells. People who would rather be interesting than right. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Brand's face went through several expressions in quick succession. Surprise, anger, something that might have been hurt. When he spoke, his voice was low and controlled. That's beneath you, Joy. It really is. You don't know me. You don't know what I believe or why I believe it. You've constructed this cartoon version of who you think I am, and you're arguing with that instead of actually listening to what I'm saying. I've listened, Joy replied. I've listened to hours of your content. I've heard the way you talk about these issues, and what I've concluded is that you're either genuinely confused about how science works or you're deliberately misleading people. Either way, it's a problem. Whoopi raised both hands, trying to regain control of the segment. Okay, I think we need to wrap this up. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about something else. But Joy wasn't done. No, I want him to answer the question. Russell, do you accept any responsibility for the impact your words have? Do you accept that when you cast doubt on medical interventions, real people make decisions based on that? And some of those people get hurt. Brand's jaw clenched. Of course, I think about the impact of my words every day. But I also think about the impact of staying silent. I think about the people who've been harmed by blind trust in institutions. I think about the voices that get silenced because they don't fit the approved narrative. And I've decided that giving those people a voice is worth the risk of making people uncomfortable. Uncomfortable? Joy said with a bitter laugh. People aren't uncomfortable, Russell. They're dead. They're dead because they believe the misinformation that you and others spread. But sure, let's call it uncomfortable. That was the line. You could see it in Brand's face the moment something shifted from heated debate to something else entirely. His voice, when it came out, was steel. You have no right to put those deaths on me. None. I have never told anyone to avoid medical care. I have never told anyone to put themselves at risk. What I have done is encourage critical thinking. And if that's a crime in your world, then your world is more authoritarian than I thought. Joy stood up fully now, matching his energy. Critical thinking? Is that what we're calling it? Because it looks a lot like anti-intellectual pandering to me. It looks like someone who's decided that expertise doesn't matter, that years of education and research count for nothing, that anyone with an internet connection knows just as much as someone with a medical degree. That is not what I've said, Brand replied, his voice raised now to match hers. You're deliberately misrepresenting my position because it's easier to argue against a strawman than engage with what I'm actually saying. Then what are you actually saying? Joy demanded. Because from here, it sounds like a whole lot of nothing wrapped up in spiritual language and conspiracy innuendo. It sounds like someone who's found a niche and is milking it for everything it's worth. Brand took a step closer to the table, his presence suddenly more imposing. What I'm saying is that people deserve honesty. They deserve to know when experts disagree. They deserve to know when financial incentives might be influencing recommendations. They deserve to have their concerns heard instead of dismissed. And they deserve to make their own choices without being called idiots or conspiracy theorists. That's what I'm saying, Joy. And if that threatens you, maybe you should ask yourself why. It doesn't threaten me, Joy said, though her voice suggested otherwise. It disgusts me because I've seen what happens when people don't trust medicine. I've seen the resurgence of diseases we'd almost eliminated. I've seen parents making decisions that cost their children's lives. And I've seen people like you washing your hands of any responsibility for that. Whoopi stood up this time, her voice firm. Okay, that's enough. We're done here. Russell, thank you for coming on, but I think it's time for you to go. Brand looked at Whoopi, then back at Joy, then at the other hosts. There was a moment where it seemed like he might argue, might push back against being dismissed, but instead he nodded slowly. Right, he said quietly. Of course, can't have anyone disrupting the echo chamber. It's not an echo chamber, Joy called after him as he started to walk away. It's called having standards. Brand stopped, turned back one more time. No, Joy. It's called being afraid of ideas you can't control. But you keep telling yourself it's about standards if that helps you sleep at night. And with that, Russell Brand walked off the View set. The studio audience sat in stunned silence. The hosts looked at each other with expressions ranging from shock to vindication to discomfort. The cameras kept rolling for another few seconds before finally cutting to commercial, capturing what would become one of the most talked about moments in the show's history. So there you have it. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already and drop a comment below telling me what you thought. Think of this face-off.